I'm a Juggernaut, bitch! Don't you know who I am? Dude, that's so iconic when I was a kid. YouTube had just kicked in and
Silly bitch, your weapons cannot harm me. Don't you know who the fuck I am? I'm the Juggernaut. You better run, Charles. Charles, no! Charles, you got in my head. I'm the Juggernaut, bitch.
Juggernaut was like the star of the show. They took the animated series and they just did all this silly voiceover stuff, and it was just fantastic. Juggernaut, bitch! So believe it or not, our story doesn't start with Juggernaut. Our story actually starts with Rhino. I originally took the Zangief mold and was turning it into a classic Rhino. I had the full schematics all kind of laid out, and I had this vision. I really wanted a big chunky boy Rhino to fit my scale. To achieve this, I had to purchase the Marvel Legends Rhino. I really appreciated the head sculpt of that particular figure. I would have liked to have had the original Rhino, but obviously the price tag on that guy was quite expensive. Just a quick size comparison of what Rhino would have looked like side by side next to the original Rhino that I stripped for parts. Basically, I only needed the head, maybe the hands and the feet. He's definitely a lot larger in terms of mass. You know, his thighs are absolutely thick as thick, but his upper body isn't as chunky. I really like experimenting with weird proportions these days. I don't like to have things all perfectly accurate to how it should look. I like to disproportionalize a lot of these characters, and obviously that's why Juggernaut turned out the way he turned out. Now obviously there is some work that needs to be done, so I ended up cutting this off, which obviously blew up in my face later on because Juggernaut actually has a design where those rivets on that belt are accurate to his official design in some comic books. So that's a little bit frustrating, but again, I went into this with the mindset of Rhino, not Juggernaut. And since we're on topic of reference art, these were the references that I used on top of the Toy Biz design itself, just to kind of emphasize a little bit more of a modernization, giving it that 90s feel. And obviously the proportions of Juggernaut back then, he had these very long arms and he was very slim and sleek in comparison to his big chunky variant these days. So obviously there was a lot of prep work that had to be done, and this guy required a full body sand. Not going to harp on too much, but at the end of the day, if you want your custom action figures to articulate, this is a necessary process. And then obviously all these scars needed to be removed, which required, you know, sculpting over. In this case, I think I used black stuff, you know, a form of milliput, which did the trick, but I wish I'd have used Aves. I've been using Aves a lot lately, and I find it far more durable, I find it far more easier to work with. I honestly wish I'd have found it out a lot sooner. Now, the boots have been completely removed, and I've dremeled in what looks like calf muscles with the shin, and I was trying to make this accurate to what the stormcollectibles have already kind of put out, pre-existing figures, and I basically imitated their style. Obviously it's not quite accurate to how the human body looks, but these are, you know, comic book characters. They're not supposed to look like human beings, you know. They're fantastical, I suppose. So once all that milliput had dried, I had to go in and sand a lot of it down so that it was flush with the body, and that obviously required a great amount of work. It wasn't easy. And then this is him fully painted and prepped and sanded, and yeah, this was kind of where I got up to, and I was really happy with it. This was like the groundwork. This was where I was supposed to take this and then elevate it to the next level by adding all the body armor, the shoulder pads, just making him real pretty. And I gotta say, I think I may go back and redo this one. So with that being said, this guy, before disclaimer, this guy is a work in progress. I never really finished this guy, and I never will. I'm done with this custom. I don't want to do it anymore. Its difficulty spike has put me through the ringer, and I've had enough. And you may be thinking, well, what's difficult about this? Well, I took certain joints from certain figures and forced everything in. It's old school. You know, this has been raised up. This is the select head that's been modified for a Storm Collectibles articulation. These are Marvel Select arms that have been modified to fit this Storm Collectibles Zangief. So this is a Storm Collectibles Zangief into a Marvel Select Hulk. This is Juggernaut so far with his heavy modification. That's roughly where we're at. That's 13.5 hours. How is this a Zangief, right? Like, Zangief is stocky. So how did I raise him up and make him big? There was so much to it. I did originally make the socket there so that it could plug in to the boot, but there just isn't enough room for the clearance of this articulation, which sits about here, man. There just isn't enough room for boot swivel, and then with how much I've cut off, you know, that's a good inch, but I've already dremeled absolutely tons of this, so it was up here before. I would go as far as to say that this yellow here, with this shading and this line work and having it paint rub free, was the hardest part. It really was. It was so difficult to eliminate paint rub from this area. The biggest challenge by far. The amount of sealers I was using, the airbrush kept clogging, and dude, there were so many things that happened. So this whole midsection, as little as it is, had so much modification that it was just something else, right? So in here, there's a ball joint, and it's connected to the Zangief. But then this has been cut and spliced and raised up so that he has a bigger presence, so he looks taller and more, I'm not even going to say proportional, because he's not, right? Like, he is a really weird shape, and that was intentional. Obviously, you know me, I create these Storm Collectibles now, and they don't proportionally accurately fit the characters anymore. And this one was inspired by the Toy Biz figure from back in the day. This one right here. And it looks goofy, and it looks silly, and I wanted to kind of take a little bit of that, just a pinch of that, and just pour it all over this figure, you know? It doesn't necessarily look as silly as this, obviously, because it's been modernized and it's a Storm Collectibles. But it's still kind of wacky and weird. It's got these very strange arms that are very stylized. They are Storm Collectibles joints, but they were Marvel Select originally. They've been completely painted. These are Marvel Legends hands. They're fist hands. I never got around to doing the open hands, which kind of sucks, but it's there. Then the upper torso has these like butterfly joints, but they're really crap. They just don't do what they need to do because I just didn't engineer them well enough. So I fixed these joints. This one's a little bit loose. It needs a little bit of tightening, but this one is nice and firm. I was stressing so heavily about this, and don't get me wrong, this is ugly and I get that, but it's all covered, so there's no worries there. It's just the fact that it's fixed now, or at least this one needs to be touched up. This one, not so much. This one's nice and firm. But basically all it is Storm Collectibles plastic shavings, super glued down to connect the joints, and then same again, over and over, probably 3 or 4 times. You're gonna hear Tay in the background, my son. So basically all it is just a layering process of like shaving of plastics, just layered, and then UV resin over the top, which takes about 36 hours to cure to get like a solid firm joint, and yeah, you end up with quite a positive result. Don't get me wrong, that is worst case scenario. That is a catastrophe type situation for Storm Collectibles.
but hopefully it's all downhill from now. This project has given me really big burnout, and I kind of want to move on to something else now because it's really getting on my nerves, to be honest. And I really loved having this paint job, and it got ruined. And you know, I got like dinks and super glue marks, which really frustrate me. To get rid of that, I'd have to sand all this down and redo the whole paint job. I'm just not willing to do that right now. So these need more shading, more of like a pale white, similar to this color here. And yeah, just a bit more work to be done on this guy, and he should be done soon. Okay, so just another quick update. So I've sanded these butterfly joints completely down. They have to be repainted. That took absolutely ages, honestly. Whew. Yeah, so now they all fit in really nice, and it all flows, and you'll have that range, you know. Also beefs out the shoulders a little bit more, so it looks a little bit more proportional. So there's that, and it's the same for this side as well. Took forever. I've still kept the left and right on there too, so I know which is which. Still got to paint all this up. I've also got to modify these. I'm going to give him ball joints so he has more range of movement in his wrists and his hands and all that sort of jazz. So these are now done. Stormcollectibles, modified versions of select arms. Anyways, big job. As you can tell, this thing's exhausting me. And then the torso. I had to go in and completely sand everything back because it just got absolutely trashed when I was trying to pop the arms in. Gonna have to repaint all this, but it's still flexible, still good to go. So just need to repaint that. And this has had an update, so started to notice like a crack in here. So I applied more resin, put a brown stuff sculpt, it's more like silver, but over the top. And then I'll probably repaint this because I'm starting to get like little tiny chips, and I really can't stand that. So I'm going to probably sand all this back, and redo the whole paint job. The Zangief butterfly joints suck, right? So I just didn't get round to doing it properly. So like it's super limited, which isn't great because, you know, you want Juggernaut running, and, you know, you can get him in some alright poses, don't get me wrong, and because it's a stormcollectibles, you can kind of get those running poses for sure. Can he hold his own weight? Yep. Balance on one foot, no problem. Well, yeah.
Head crush!
It looks alright. And then, you know, if you want to really get into it, you can have...
I'm Juggernaut!
Ah! You know what I mean? So you do get quite a nice running Juggernaut. Another thing that kind of is irritating, because of the modification in this torso, obviously there's gapping. There's always gapping in Storm Collectibles. It is what it is, and I don't mind it personally because it allows more articulation. You know, it's kind of like a Reveltech, right? How they are very gappy if you don't articulate them right. It's the same for this. If you want to get those cool poses, you can definitely get them. But in terms of like bending over, he bends over quite well. But again, you've got that gapping. But he definitely looks more squatty, and he can look right up while he's squatting. But yeah, I don't know. I just aren't feeling it anymore for some reason. I mean, don't get me wrong. I say this, right? I do this a lot. If you're a long-time viewer, you'll be like, yeah, but you say that, and then you go and you redo it, and you come back, and, you know, next minute you know, you've got a brand new version of it. It's been retooled and changed and this and that, right? So, I mean, yeah, I do tend to conflict my words a lot. And now that I'm playing with him, I kind of dig him a lot. Also, if I'm going to do some sort of rework on Juggernaut, I would probably like to have the boots a yellow brown to match the midsection, very similar to the Marvel vs. Capcom Sprite variant. So I don't have a Zangief, but I do have a Spider-Hulk. This is the Zangief mold, and this is also the Zangief mold. So the arms have been modified, but overall it's the same. You can see how high I've elevated it. It's a lot larger. Now, if I was to put them in scale correctly, that is where we're at. This guy obviously stocky because he's supposed to be a Hulk, and this guy should be as stocky as him but bigger. So again, he looks too lanky. I wanted him to be like, you know, like here and like outwards, like here, you know. So when he's next to Wolverine, which we'll do right now. So Wolverine, I wanted him to be gigantic. And don't get me wrong, he is, right? Like, he's massive, but he's not as big as I would have liked him to be. Not only that, but this is a kind of like Marvel vs. Capcom stylized version of Wolverine. And I would have loved to have had a Marvel vs. Capcom Juggernaut.
I'm unstoppable! I'm Juggernaut! Oh! Ow!
You know, like that massive, thick, huge body. That would have been sick, but Stormcollectibles just isn't providing us the big chunky bodies. And the biggest body mold that I've kind of come across is the Marvel Select Hulk. So the Hulk is obviously bigger in terms of mass, body proportion, everything, right? And Juggernaut would have looked really good on here, right? For example, I don't know whether you can envision these things like me. And, you know, if you were to sink that down, that is a great Juggernaut. And you could do that very easily. But it's not a Stormcollectibles. The point of the matter is, Juggernaut would have looked really good on this. It wouldn't have moved the way that I would have liked it to move. Now that I have a whole new skill set due to working with this, I could do something to upgrade it, you know, maybe take the Storm Articulation and engineer it into this torso. So for example, I could take the brackets that are in this hollow chest piece, hollow this entirely out, put it in, hollow this out, like this, sink it in there and give it this massive proportion, this bulk. Or I could take the Marvel Select Juggernaut and do the exact same thing I just described I could do to the Hulk. Or maybe I could take the Marvel Select Juggernaut, fusion it with this guy, and fusion it with this guy. Imagine the possibility. I could create something very fantastic. I just feel like this, at the time, was good, and now it's outdated. Due to skill set. Obviously, he's very shiny as well. I described that in a previous video. That needs to... There's a reason why I have the figures ultra glossy, and it's to make them durable for paint rub. But with Juggernaut, it doesn't make sense. And I was able to achieve paint rub free with him, and he's like a matte, well, he's a satin. You know, he is paint rub free, and that's yellow. He's a little bit shiny, but nothing too crazy, you know, not like Juggernaut. Juggernaut's very shiny. Matte paint just isn't durable enough to have customs. It doesn't work with the joints, honestly. So, yeah, that's my thought process with that. And I'll probably be in another video talking about how I upgraded this guy at some point. You know, I'm going through a lot of my customs lately and reworking them. I need them to be way more refined because they just aren't as good as I'd like them to be.
With that being said, I really want to say thank you to all the Patreon members. We've been getting more and more and more and more and more, which is fantastic. And I am planning on opening up more tiers to allow people to be a little bit more better educated in custom action figures, such things as, you know, paint rub free, sculpting tutorials, so on and so forth. So if you guys want to fund that and be a part of that, then link in the description below, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.